Hey, it's Annalicia. What you're about to tune into is an episode from my Exercise 180 podcast. My E180 podcast is a private podcast for my E180 members only. The first 18 episodes consist of the audio-only version of my E180 course lessons, plus my Fit and Fabulous for Life masterclass. Episode 19 marks the beginning of extended E180 content and includes audio notes from me, so top-of-mind insights from my personal life and responses to questions from my E180 members, plus interviews with other thought leaders. If you'd like to learn more about becoming an E180 member and getting access to this private podcast, go to the description box of this video. You'll find a special link there that will allow you to become a member at a major discount. Now, on to the topic at hand. Hey, it's Annalicia. I'm happy to be bringing you part 2 of our 7-part Awakening to Kindness series today. In part 1, episode 64 here on the podcast, we talked about the apparently subtle but ultimately vast difference between the questions, what's wrong and what's wrong with me when we have problems in our lives. We felt into how the question, what's wrong, ultimately leads to curiosity, while the question, what's wrong with me, ultimately leads to shame. Now, we live in a culture that glorifies shame. The Western culture tells us that the key to solving problems is we must feel really bad about having them. But shame is actually what Nancy Van Dyken, a clinical psychologist and a clinical social worker, author of the book Everyday Narcissism, labels as a quote-unquote childlike state. So let's take a breath on that for a second. That's sort of like, whoa, right? This thing, shame, that has been positioned to all of us in our culture as the key to being quote-unquote responsible, the key to being quote-unquote good, is actually an emotionally immature, childish response to life. That's sort of huge to wrap the mind around, isn't it? Now, if you're anything like me, you might start to feel bad about being duped by this positioning of shame. So you might be feeling shameful for feeling shameful. Oh, the rabbit hole of shame. Am I right? So if you're noticing that right now, you're so not alone. But I think it's worth it for all of us to catch it and see it for what it is, which is the rabbit hole of shame. Just another example of how shame replicates. It never liberates. Shame begets shame, begets shame, begets shame. So when seen accurately, shame is not and never has been the key to problem solving. Shame is not and never has been the key to responsibility or goodness. Shame is not and never has been the key to healthy, joyful living. When seen accurately, shame seems to be, in fact, the key to staying stuck. Sort of an oxymoron, isn't it? The key to staying stuck. So, how do we go from staying stuck to unlocking positive change in our lives, both personally and collectively? How do we go from I am a problem to I am not a problem, I unlock solutions? I think the key is, drumroll please, labeling things accurately. That's probably not what you thought I was going to say, is it? Okay, but hear me out. The glorification of shame has disoriented all of us. It has us asking the wrong questions. So, for example, instead of asking what's wrong, it's having us ask what's wrong with me. It has us defining things in utterly incorrect ways. So, for example, aligning the idea of responsibility with shame, which we now know is actually a childlike state. And it has us identifying who we are in ways that keep us stuck. So, for example, thinking I am a problem instead of thinking I am not a problem, I unlock solutions. Human beings are brilliantly creative. We are designed to solve problems. When we're stuck, it's not because that's who we are. It's because shame is telling us that's who we are. So when this sort of utter disorientation has been done to us, a reorientation is required. And that reorientation process is a process of labeling things accurately. So let's get started with a little reorientation, shall we? If you have a notebook or journal, get it out now, and we're going to do a little exercise. If you don't have time to actually do this exercise with me now, that's totally fine. It's still worth listening in on. So for those of you who have your notebook or journal out, turn it from portrait to landscape orientation and draw a line right down the middle of the page. Then draw another line splitting the left side of the paper in half, and a third and final line splitting the right side of the paper in half. Once you're done, you should have 4 columns. Label those columns 1 through 4 from left to right. Then head to column number 2 and label it My Problems. Now, I'm going to ask you to take a few moments to sort of take stock of your life and jot down your current problems in column 2. These problems might be physical, they might be emotional, they might be financial, they might be relational. These problems could be what you consider chronic, or they might be acute. They could feel utterly massive or be seemingly small. So, for example, your column number 2 might read, I have an annoying cold this week. I have $20,000 plus in credit card debt. I have time for nothing besides work and housework. And me and my spouse fight constantly. Or maybe your column 2 says, I've had chronic gut issues for 5 years. Lately, I feel pretty anxious. My house is always a mess. I don't know what my next steps are in my career. And I don't know how to get my kid to sleep at night. Anything you're willing to get out and get on paper is huge. Please know, you do not have to show this to anyone. You don't have to talk about it with anyone if you don't want to. You could even safely destroy this when you're finished if that gives you more permission to do this exercise. The more you're willing to get out and put into column 2, the better. Now, I know that's a little counterintuitive because we live in this culture that wants us all to act like we don't have any problems and rewards us for doing just that. But here, in this space with me, we're not abiding by those cultural norms. That's because they're not healthy and they're not working for anyone. We all have problems. The key is not trying to avoid problems because then we're simply not living. The key is becoming skilled at problem solving, and this exercise is going to help you with that. So get all of your problems into column 2. If you need more space, kudos to you. That's great. In that case, create 4 columns again on another piece of paper and keep going. Okay, pause this now. Good luck. I'll be here when you're finished. Welcome back. Well done. That is no small feat. Now, if you're feeling a little or a large sinking feeling as you look at all of your problems, that makes sense. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It actually means you're doing this process right. Nancy Van Dyken, the clinical psychologist and social worker I mentioned earlier, when talking about shame says, let yourself feel shame. Counterintuitive as it sounds, allowing yourself to feel shame is the key to healing from it, growing beyond it, and letting it fall away. Dr. Becky Kennedy, the clinical psychologist I mentioned in episode 64, part 1 of this series, talks about how our experience of feelings are not just the emotion or sensation in and of itself. It is actually the feeling, so the emotion or physical sensation, plus the presence or lack of presence with that feeling that ends up equaling our overall experience of that feeling. Isn't that fascinating? Now, what most of us tend to do when we're experiencing unpleasant, uncomfortable emotions or sensations is we try to escape them. Which makes sense, right? Yes, it certainly makes sense to a certain extent. But ultimately, the problem with this logic is that our experience of discomfort ends up equaling the discomfort plus abandonment, the discomfort plus lack of presence, which is a completely different experience than the discomfort plus presence with the discomfort. Can you feel the difference in that? So when it comes to shame, we can begin to change our experience of it by infusing it with our presence instead of our absence. Dr. Becky Kennedy offers a bench metaphor that I love, and I'm going to lead you through a quick visualization of my interpretation of her metaphor now. So if you have time and space, close your eyes and move through this visualization with me in that way. If you don't have the time or space for that right now, though, that's totally fine. It's still worth listening in on. So whether your eyes are closed right now or not, in your mind's eye, see yourself in a park with a bunch of benches. Each bench is labeled with a different feeling: joy, shame, disappointment, embarrassment, fear, confusion, so on and so forth. Now, in your mind's eye, see yourself walk over to the shame bench. Then take out the journaling you just did about your problems and sit on the bench, look at your problems, and feel the shame. Now imagine the person you are right now, witnessing all of this in your mind's eye, heading over to the bench and sitting next to the version of yourself that's already there. There's no need to say anything, maybe just a gentle smile, a touch on the knee or the shoulder. But this is not about cheering up. This is not about getting rid of the shame. This is about being with it. In other words, it's not about getting rid of your problems. It's about bringing compassion to your problems. If it feels like it would be helpful, you're also welcome to invite my presence in. If that's intriguing and it resonates, envision me walking over to the shame bench and sitting down with you as well. I certainly can't say I understand what you're going through in terms of the specifics of your problems. Only you know that. But I, of course, totally understand what shame feels like. So take a couple deep breaths, gently holding this vision. If you'd like to stay here for longer, you're welcome to pause this now. But know that you don't have to stay long for it to begin to change your experience of shame. One more deep breath. If your eyes are closed, blink them open now. Matt Kahn has a quote that I love. He says, "You don't need different circumstances. You need more support with the circumstances you're in." Take a breath on that. Isn't that beautiful? I'm going to say it one more time. You don't need different circumstances. You need more support with the circumstances you're in. So a lot of times I think we get caught in the loop of trying to quote unquote solve our problems by jumping right to trying to change our circumstances. But then we seem to be missing the first and most important step, which is affirming to ourselves that we're going to support ourselves as best we can in the current circumstances and through the process of creating new circumstances. We have to pledge allegiance to ourselves. Without that, we'll continue to abandon ourselves, and our experience of our problems will always be infused with that abandonment. And problems infused with abandonment, with absence of presence, with lack of support, tend to be problems that remain unsolved, or that repeat, or that get worse over time. It is only the voice of shame that tells us that we are undeserving of support when we have problems. And with this voice in our heads, shame replicates. It is the voice of something much wiser that says we deserve more support with our problems, not less. And with this voice in our heads, we liberate. So now, let's get back to our journaling exercise and the process of reorientation through the process of labeling things accurately. So the first thing I want you to do is locate your column 2 label, which is my problems, and scribble out the my. Why? Because it's not an accurate label. A more accurate label is simply problems. These are human problems that way more people than you realize can relate to. They are not as personal as shame has led you to believe. Yes, sure, you had a part in creating them. And yes, sure, it is your responsibility to create new circumstances for yourself if that's what you want. But shame would like you to make them very, very personal and 100% your fault. And that's just simply not true. I love the way Dr. Ashok Betty, a certified Jungian psychoanalyst and a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, puts it. He says, "The dogged insistence on personal responsibility for choices and consequences is admirable. However, this insistence can also obstruct investigation and reflection upon causes beyond our personal choice." So, in our process of reorientation, it is important for us to loosen up our dogged insistence on personal responsibility. So with column 2 now labeled problems instead of my problems, let's jump to column 3 and label that solutions. Now, what's on your paper now is the framework our Western culture seems to try to use when quote unquote problem solving. You've got a problem, find a solution. Now, I don't know about you, but I rarely find problem solving to be that obvious or straightforward. My life experience has never been quite that simplistic. And I used to really blame myself for this. Like, what's wrong with me? I've got this problem. Why can't I just figure out a solution? But ultimately, what I've come to realize is that there's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with the problem-solving framework our culture is offering us. As a culture, we have a tendency to really narrow our focus, and this is not serving us well. Instead of it facilitating problem solving, it's actually perpetuating problems. Problem solving requires a broader focus and a skillful decoding of what I call the language of life. Because life rarely speaks in obvious black or white terms. Let me give you an example. This is an example I love to give when talking about the language of life. And the example is a headache. When we have a headache, life is speaking to us. Our body, full of life, is telling us something's up. So the thing that's obviously wrong is the headache. And in our culture, we label the headache the quote-unquote problem. However, the cause of headaches varies. Sometimes we get headaches because we're dehydrated. Sometimes we get headaches because we're lacking in the mineral magnesium. So magnesium is a mineral that helps dilate your blood vessels. So when you are deficient in it, your blood vessels might have a hard time dilating. So they're very constrictive, which can cause headaches. Sometimes we get headaches because we've been clenching our teeth out of stress and the muscles in our neck and our face are tense. And the list goes on and on and on. So can you see how the headache is the thing that's obviously wrong, but it's not the thing that's actually wrong? Can you feel the difference in that? If this is resonating, what I'd like you to do right now on your paper is go to column 2, where you originally wrote my problems, but now it just says problems, and actually cross out the label problems altogether. Problems is not an accurate label for column 2. In an attempt to begin to label it accurately, in place of the label problems, let's write instead what's obviously wrong. Then, in an attempt to broaden our focus, let's start to use and address the other mysterious columns, column 1 and column 4. So in column 1, write what's actually wrong. So column 2 is now what's obviously wrong, and column 1 is what's actually wrong. So coming back to our headache example, the headache would fall under column 2, the thing that's obviously wrong. And under column 1 might be a lack of water, or a lack of magnesium, or muscle tension, so on and so forth. Now, what we typically do in our culture to quote unquote treat a headache is take medication. So, we pop an ibuprofen and the headache temporarily goes away. And because the headache goes away, we call this a quote unquote solution. But can you see how the medication is not addressing what is actually wrong? So the label solution reveals itself as inaccurate. So let's go to column 3, cross out the label solution, and instead write temporary relief, because that label is more accurate, isn't it? An actual solution would address the thing that's actually wrong, right? Which makes an actual solution very different than temporary relief. Now, let me just take a moment to acknowledge that shame might be creeping in right now and trying to get you to feel bad for the things you do in your life that offer you temporary relief. In other words, it might be trying to demonize column number 3. But here's the deal. There's nothing wrong or bad about any of these columns. They are all equally valid, important parts of the human experience. They are all equally valid, important parts of the problem-solving process. Temporary relief from what's obviously wrong can offer us time and space to figure out what's actually wrong, which makes it a very important component in the mosaic of life, a very important component in the mosaic of problem solving. The only thing that causes problems is when we're labeling things inaccurately. So, for example, when we're calling choices meant to offer temporary relief, quote unquote, solutions, and when we're narrowing our focus in and thinking we only have 2 columns to work with when we really have 4. So let's go to the final mysterious column, column 4, because this is where our solutions lie, not in column 3. So let's mark that column with the label solutions. True solutions are going to address what is actually wrong. So coming back to our headache example, if what's actually wrong is dehydration, the actual solution would be more water. If what's actually wrong is a magnesium deficiency, the actual solution would be more magnesium. If what's actually wrong is muscle tension, the actual solution would be muscle relaxation. In other words, with actual solutions, there's always an imbalance being corrected. And put simply, that's what problem solving really is, right? Correcting imbalances. So if this is resonating, let's add those accurate labels to our language of life framework. So in column 1, write imbalances, and in column 4, write more balance. Now, notice that the label for column 4 isn't balance. It's more balance. And that's because problem solving. That's because healthy, joyful living does not require perfection. It does not require us to be perfectly balanced. And that makes sense, right? Because being perfectly balanced isn't even possible. It's a myth. And if there's one thing I know about healthy, joyful living, it's that it cannot be built on what is not real. Myths do not create solid foundations. Talk about sandy soil, right? So what's required is not balance. What's required is movement in the direction of more balance, movement towards balance. When I was in health coach training, the founder of the school I went to, which was integrative nutrition, the founder's name was Joshua Rosenthal, and he said, given half a chance, your body can heal itself. So one more time, given half a chance, your body can heal itself. Now, I remember being so struck by this statement. I mean, I can literally remember exactly where I was in the little 1-bedroom apartment where my husband and I lived when I heard Joshua say this while listening to one of my initial health coach training modules. It was the dining room, by the way, if you were wondering, which, if we're talking about labeling things accurately, seems like way too nice of a label for my actual surroundings. I'm not sure what you would actually call it, but it wasn't really a dining room. It was more of a room off of our tiny kitchen that shared the same ugly, tannish, brownish carpet that our living room had. And that was too small for an actual dining room table, but too big for the little cafe style table that we got as a wedding gift off of our Target registry. So there was in, we'll call it my quote unquote dining room, struck by this statement, but not in a good way. I was a ball of resistance. I almost felt offended by what he had said. Like, Joshua, how could you say that? How could you say that given half a chance, my body can heal itself when it has always been medicine that has gotten me out of binds when it comes to my physical health? My body has been the problem, Joshua, never the solution. Now, that ball of resistance within me was not unraveled overnight. In fact, I think I'm still unraveling it, and we're a decade plus removed from that moment. But what I definitely recognize now is that when I'm labeling my body as a problem and medicine as the solution, I'm operating from the narrow-focused, inaccurately labeled framework our culture offers us for quote-unquote problem solving that is actually keeping us all very stuck. When I'm labeling my body as a problem and medicine as the solution, I am not operating with a broader focus or skillfully decoding the language of life. And this recognition has not led me to a depreciation for medicine or the practice of medicine. It has actually led to a higher appreciation of it. I now better understand how and when and why to use Western medicine in my life. So you could say I actually hold it in a much, much higher regard than I did before when I was using it less purposefully. So what initially went unrecognized in Joshua's statement, given half a chance, your body can heal itself, that I can recognize now is what he's actually saying is no perfection required. Isn't that nice? No perfection required. In fact, he goes way beyond the idea of perfection. It's just half a chance, which isn't even close to perfection. It's more like, if you get a D-, you pass sort of situation. I think it can be hard to accept this because we often, in many areas of our life, have the experience of massive efforts to no avail, which is a very different experience than Just give something half a chance and watch it succeed. And we often don't process the experience of massive effort to no avail as, oops, I must not have been working towards correcting the imbalance my symptoms were trying to get my attention about. Instead, we often process the experience of massive effort to no avail as, life is hard and what's wrong with me? But what if we did start processing the experience of massive effort to no avail differently? What if we saw it as an opportunity to pause and choose again? To choose differently, instead of pushing forward in the same direction, instead of trying harder at the same thing. And I think this is easier to do when we can recognize column 2, the things that are obviously wrong in our lives, the symptoms we experience, the discomforts and inconveniences we endure, as conversation starters. What if that's all they really are? What if they're not as dark and scary as they seem to appear? What if, when accurately labeled, they are simply, but powerfully, conversation starters about life with life? What if the things you want to go away are actually life talking to you? What if this is the language of life? And what if you got really good at decoding this language? How would that change things for you? Silently repeat after me. I am not a problem. I unlock solutions. I am not a problem. I unlock solutions. One more time. I am not a problem. I unlock solutions. The first step to problem solving is letting our problems breathe. This is how we unlock solutions. We have to stop weighing them down and locking them in with the heavy label of my problems, and instead start to see them more accurately as loving conversation starters about imbalances we're unaware of that need some of our attention. And we have to stop packing them into a narrow focus 2-column framework of thinking that's solving no one's problems and keeping everyone stuck. And finally, we have to stop pushing them down in avoidance or denial because we've let shame convince us that we are unworthy of support in our current circumstances. So, huge kudos to you. You've let your problems breathe today. They are now out of you and on paper where you can witness them, where you can bring your presence and compassion to them. They're also now labeled accurately and positioned in a more expansive framework than before. You've done a lot today. Wow. There is no more that you have to do right now aside from celebrating what you've already done, which once again is you've let your quote-unquote problems breathe. This is how we start to unlock solutions. So it's never worthwhile to force any insights when it comes to working with this 4-column language of life framework. However, what I will say is if insights come to you, jot them down. So that could be on a fresh sheet of paper, or if it makes sense, start filling in this 4-column language of life framework as you get insights and recognitions of, for example, what an imbalance might be that a discomfort in your life is trying to get your attention about, or as you get insights and recognitions about what you thought was a solution or working towards a solution might actually be temporary relief. And realize that each insight you get, each thing you're willing to place in an appropriate column to label accurately, you are more and more unlocking true solutions in your life. And as we unlock more and more solutions, we liberate ourselves to experience more health and more joy. Until next time, be kind to yourself.
Bright life to live. I feel the changes.